this moment, we are recording today's presentation. There will be a follow-up email, hopefully today, if I can get to it, that will include a recording or a link to the recording, as well as all of the handouts that I'll be giving you. Also a post presentation survey, so to let us know how we're doing. And I would ask that you take a little bit of time to do that. I've got a pretty thick skin, so you can be as honest as possible. You'll notice when you came into the room that you were automatically muted. That's not in stone. We've got a fairly small group, so if you do have questions, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, definitely use the chat feature in the toolbar. We've all been going through Zoom in the Zoom world long enough. I'm just going to assume that you kind of know these different features. I find, especially in my house in the mornings, that internet connectivity can be a little spotty. You may find that turning off your video will help with your bandwidth. I will be turning my video off shortly here, just because, like I say, in my home, especially on a Monday morning, for some reason, I guess everybody's going to work online and the internet gets a little wonky. So just to help save the bandwidth, feel free to keep your cameras off. I'm not going to be offended. I'll trust that you're all there. Actually, was I done with all that? I think so. Yep. And you can always call in, of course. Before we get started with the presentation, as always, there are a couple of commercials here that we have to talk about to let you know who is presenting or who is bringing you this particular series of presentations. The Helen Bader Institute for Nonprofit Management, where I work, we are pleased to partner with Candid. You'll learn more about Candid in a moment, to offer a significant amount of content in our new Nonprofit Skills Academy, which this presentation is a part of. HBI we are actually going into our 20th anniversary year of providing support to the nonprofit community of Milwaukee and beyond through education, research, and community education. Primarily, we focus on graduate school, although we do have a number of non-credit programs as well, of which this particular course is a part of. There are more listed on our website. I would encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. I always like to point out our STAR program, that is our Master of Science in Nonprofit Management and Leadership. It's now one of only 10 programs in the world to achieve an accreditation status. That means that's basically a seal of approval telling you that we actually do teach what we say we teach. You're not just getting an MBA with a couple of nonprofit classes thrown in. Every single course in the program specifically focuses on aspects of the nonprofit management world. And we have that seal of approval, one of the only in the world, actually. So we're very proud of it. As an alumni and an administrator, I always want to point that out. So, and we also do a lot of research. As you may have noticed, that in the last year, we've been conducting some studies into how COVID and the closures have affected the nonprofit sector here in Wisconsin. We do have another edition of that report coming out, hopefully in a couple of weeks, if I can kind of finalize and proofread my writing. And you heard it here first. This summer, we will be conducting a nonprofit compensation and benefit study statewide. So all of you executive directors and HR directors, be prepared for a survey so that we can get a handle on the kind of standard compensation and benefits that are out there, and then in turn turn that into a biannual report every 2 years for nonprofit leaders and HR directors to use to help sort of set the standard and sort of a common language for compensation in the nonprofit world here. And then in terms of community support, it's kind of where everything else falls in. I tend to oversee a lot of this, including our Nonprofit Skills Academy, which we're dealing with here today. So that's how you can get a hold of us. Follow us, like us, comment, share, all of that on social media. You can also check out our website. Feel free to poke around there. There's a lot of additional information that I'm not going to waste your time with here today. So let's talk a little bit about Candid. They are in many ways the host of today's presentation. And bear with me, I am obligated to read some of this out loud to you. On February 1st, 2019, Foundation Center and GuideStar joined forces to become Candid, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And together, these organizations brought a combined 88 years of expertise and millions of data points to Candid. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where the money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. They believe that an effective social sector is critical for a thriving society. And they believe in the importance of solutions for the sector by the sector. So with Candid, nonprofits, foundations, donors, and the general public can all be on the same page. And they do that through research, collaboration, and training. And Candid connects people who want to change the world. They connect people who want to change the world to the resources they need to do it. With Candid, you can find funding with the foundation directory online and search over now 165,000 funders and over 16 million grants, and increase your visibility with the funder community by creating or hopefully maintaining your GuideStar nonprofit profile. You can then also strengthen your nonprofit by participating in Candid learning trainings, just like this one, to move your fundraising skills to the next level. Thank you for being a part of Candid's learning community. We recognize that this may be a challenging time for many people. Candid has shifted its key learning opportunities to a virtual format, and you can check them out at Candid Learning Online. And they have also invested in providing the social sector with resources they need to make informed decisions about today's most important issues. In the chat, you'll find the links that that are mentioned here. Feel free to check them out. These will also be included in the follow-up email. These are resources that Candid and HBI have put together, both focusing on COVID-related issues and racial equity. I think that also there is a link, and I would strongly recommend signing up for Candid Learning's newsletter. Many of you have probably heard in the past of GrantSpace. It was a former web-based education source that is now known as Candid Learning. They incorporated that as well as GuideStar and all of these other entities into what we now call Candid. So definitely check them out and learn. There are more opportunities just like this one available nationwide. All right, so let's get into the reason you're all here. We'll walk through an introduction to corporate giving. So today we are going to be discussing how companies give, the different options for getting corporate support, both cash and non-cash. Oops, I'm jumping ahead here. There. We're going to talk about why companies give. And while many corporations do give for philanthropic reasons, they have other motivations as well. And we'll discuss what those are and what companies are looking for from nonprofit organizations. And then finally, how to find corporate partners. With traditional foundations, you submit an application for a proposal and it's accepted or not. So with companies or corporate foundations, with companies, there are many avenues that you can go down, and there are many ways you can develop those relationships, and we'll talk about that. But before we can talk about the motivations behind corporate giving and why a company might be interested in partnering with your nonprofit, let's take a quick look at how companies support nonprofits. And so you can see from this graph, corporations contribute to nonprofits both monetarily and by other means. The data shows that corporate giving primarily falls in the form of cash contributions at 82%. And this is from 2018, the numbers here. And only 21% coming in the form of what we would call, or 18 in this case, coming from in the form of non-cash contributions. We'll talk about non-cash contributions in a second and what we mean by that, but let's look at the cash side first. So the cash part, the blue part of this pie graph, can be split in two, like this. And this shows the cash contributions broken down into foundation cash and direct cash, with direct cash taking up nearly half of the pie. This is helpful to distinguish because, as I mentioned a second ago, corporations can contribute to nonprofits in a lot of different ways. So unlike traditional foundations, which usually only have one mechanism for submitting requests, a company may have many vehicles for support. So if one door closes, there may be another door to try, right? So let's take a closer look at cash contributions. Cash contributions can come in the form of foundation grants, corporate contributions, corporate sponsorships, cause-related marketing, and matching gifts through their employees. And we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. Foundation grants. So some companies choose to make contributions through organized philanthropy, meaning they choose to set up a foundation to distribute grant funds. Company-sponsored foundations are also referred to as corporate foundations. They are private foundations whose grant funds are derived from the contributions of a for-profit business. A company-sponsored foundation may retain close ties with the donor company, but it's important to know that it is an independent organization with its own endowment, its own board of directors, and it's subject to the same rules and regulations as private foundations, that is, family or community foundations. In this case here in Milwaukee, everybody is probably familiar with the Northwestern Mutual Foundation, which is a company-sponsored foundation of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance based here in Milwaukee. The good news is that foundations, including company-sponsored foundations, have to give money away. Foundations are nonprofit organizations just like yours, and they have to give to charitable organizations for charitable purposes, and they are required by the IRS to give away at least 5% of the prior year's assets. So that's good to know. Let's talk about corporate contributions, or these are direct cash contributions. Many companies have both a foundation and a direct corporate giving program. Direct corporate giving programs are grant-making programs established and administered within the for-profit making company. Unlike corporate foundations, these corporate contributions are not a separate entity from the corporation, and their annual grant totals are generally going to be directly related to the company's current profits. Corporate sponsorships. They are a form of marketing, really, which a corporation pays for. They pay for all or some of the costs associated with a project or program in exchange for recognition, and that level of recognition depends on the goals of the sponsor. A successful corporate sponsorship benefits both the nonprofit and its sponsor. So why might a company be interested in sponsoring an event? So events will attract large groups of people, which brings lots of visibility to the company. So a company may choose to sponsor an event so they can get their name and their brand in front of a lot of people. And we'll be talking about that in more detail when we talk about company motivations. When we think of sponsorships, we often think of events, but companies can sponsor a host of things like scholarships and entire programs. Um, are there, with those of you in the room, let me ask you, can you think of a local example of a corporate sponsored event or program or scholarship in your community? I'll give you a couple of seconds to type or think about it, but throw it in the chat. Summerfest stages, absolutely. That, we've got Harley Davidson and Briggs Stratton. Everybody owns a stage at the Summerfest grounds, right? Miller Lite sponsors the UPAF Ride for the Arts, United Performing Arts Fund. In fact, there was a time when I think Miller and Miller Lite sponsored just about every festival in the city to some degree. So that's great. Those are perfect events to examples. So let's move on then to cause-related marketing. Other companies may choose to engage in what we call cause-related marketing, which is a mutually beneficial partnership between corporations and the nonprofits. Typically in this partnership, the company will donate to the nonprofit when their product is purchased, right? So the very first example, American Express first used this phrase, cause-related marketing, back in 1983 to describe its campaign to raise money for the restoration of the Statue of Liberty. And there may be a few of you that remember this, I do. American Express donated 1 cent to the restoration fund every time somebody used its charge card, right? And as a result, the number of card holders grew by 45% and the card usage increased by 28%. And it was a huge funding resource for the restoration for the Statue of Liberty. One of the best known sort of modern examples of cause-related marketing is Tom's Shoes, who their slogan is 1 for 1. So when you buy 1 pair of shoes, they donate a pair of shoes, right? But we see examples like this all the time. I just, for example, just bought a couple of Kringle to help support a local Irish dance troupe that the daughter of a friend of mine is involved in. In high school, we had to sell candles and all kinds of things to help support our cause. So, you might see sort of an ice cream parlor that supports a local, little league team, and every time you buy an ice cream cone, a percentage of the proceeds go to the team, right? This is what we would refer to as cause-related marketing. And then I believe finally we talk about matching gifts through employees. So known as sort of matching funds, these are grants an employer makes to match its employees' charitable contributions. So typically these matching gifts are dollar for dollar, right? So, but some companies will give double or even triple the original donation. Some companies may also give matching gifts for employees' volunteer efforts. So procedures will vary with every company, but typically the individuals who are perhaps your employers or your volunteers or your donors, they have to submit a form to their employer, usually through the HR department. And so it's important to be aware of what companies offer these matching gifts and to utilize your contacts and your connections accordingly. You can, frequently you'll see volunteers effectively submit hours to their organization, and the organization then will sort of pay the nonprofit those wages to for their employees' volunteer efforts. Or we've or if they make a donation of $100, the employer will match that gift. So just kind of outline the basics of how that works. There are a number of large companies out there, the Gap, which is responsible for not just the Gap, but also, Banana Republic, a number of different brands out there, has a matching program that is probably one of the largest ones out there. But there are a number of local ones that I would encourage you to kind of poke around. I don't have examples right now yet, but they do. I know they are out there. So let's talk about non-cash contributions. And it's just as they sound. It's a contribution from a company that is not monetary, and it can also be referred to as an in-kind donation, right? Which we have heard of. But these typically will take the form of a product, pro bono services, employee volunteerism, and space, actual physical space. So we'll talk about each of these here. Products are important because a lot of relationships with that corporation will start here with the donation of a product from a company. Have any of you ever received sort of product donations from an organization? Give you 30 seconds here. So do we have any examples of product donations, in-kind donations? Music instruments, great. Technology, absolutely. I know here there are some, right? Rishi Tea, a lot of coffee donations from a lot of the different coffee shops that are out there for events and whatnot. That's fantastic. Cost just donated headphones to NAMI Southeast for our upcoming fundraiser as part of our gift boxes for participants. That's fantastic. How can I get in on that? So great. One resource I do want to point out to you is an organization or a website called Good 360, GOOD 360.org. It's a great resource for nonprofits looking for in-kind donations. It will match companies with inventory, or companies that have inventory and products to give, with nonprofits who are looking for them. So you can set up an account, register your organization there, and it's just kind of an interesting, if nothing else, just kind of poke around. I think it's kind of fantastic that that kind of resource exists for this. And this is nationwide. We're talking, there may be some regional things on there, but there's also going to be national level organizations that might have excess inventory that they're just looking to donate. So, but in-kind donations aren't just for product donations. Some companies also choose to support nonprofits by volunteering their employees or their employees' expertise. This kind of employee volunteerism often comes in the form of volunteers for an event, say. Some big companies, actually here in Milwaukee Area Technical College offers a day of service where instead of going to work, employees are essentially paid to volunteer in the community. Companies can also donate their expertise, like legal, tax, or business advice, marketing, or website development, strategic planning. They can also encourage their employees to serve on the board of local nonprofits. Employee volunteerism is a great in to a company, because if the employee becomes passionate about your organization while they're volunteering there, they can possibly open the door to further cash donations from that organization as well. So definitely something to kind of keep in your pipeline. I know Direct Supply, for example, based here in in Milwaukee has has a staff that's dedicated to managing the employee volunteerism, because it's a significant part of who their identity is as a corporation, being involved in the community. So definite strong pipeline there. And then finally, let's talk about space. A company can also donate the use of its facilities. There are a number of ways that can happen. They can offer, a hotel could offer up its ballroom to host an annual gala, or a law firm could offer up its boardrooms for meetings, that kind of thing. In some cases too, you might actually find organizations that will open up an office for the nonprofit to house itself administratively. So there's a number of different ways that that can be leveraged that I don't think people consider too much, because it's just, you feel you're infringing a little too much, but I think it's a very underutilized path into that sort of corporate engagement. So now that we've talked about how companies give, let's take a look at why they give. So unlike traditional foundations and other charitable agencies, corporations do not exist to give away money. Their allegiance instead is to their customers, their shareholders, their employees, and frankly, to their bottom line. As nonprofits, it's important to keep in mind the interests and motivations of a company when we go to them in search of support, and be very realistic about that. Here are some of the reasons that companies give to nonprofits, which we're going to talk about more thoroughly. To take advantage of tax deductions, to advance their business objectives, to increase corporate visibility, and to be good corporate citizens. We're going to take a look at each of these individually. And as we go through each one, I'm going to pose some questions you can ask yourself to determine if you're ready to approach these corporations for support. Most people think that companies give to nonprofit organizations to take advantage of the tax break, and that's true to some degree. Companies can deduct up to 10% of their taxable income. So if you're a nonprofit with a 501c3 status, companies can take a tax deduction for a donation they make to your organization. So the important question here is, are you a legal nonprofit organization? In order for companies to take advantage of the tax benefits, you need to be a legal 501c3 nonprofit organization and be registered with the IRS. If you're not legal, or you want more information on becoming a nonprofit, you can certainly contact HBI, or you can contact Marquette University's nonprofit law clinic. Candid.org has information, which we can talk about at the end. But while tax benefits are certainly appealing to the companies, a tax break is typically not going to be the primary motivation companies give to nonprofits. To advance their business objectives. This is the overarching motivation behind corporate philanthropy. Altruism, that may be a factor as well, and that's great. But often the underlying question is going to be, how would supporting this organization be good for our business? And as a nonprofit, that's something you have to be very realistic about. So what do we mean by good for business? Companies are looking for nonprofits who will connect them to current and potential customers, and who address issues of interest to the company. So if you're trying to demonstrate to a company how your nonprofit could help advance its business objectives, here's some initial questions to ask. So here we go. What audiences or constituents do you share? This is easier for some nonprofits than others. For example, an environmental protection organization might share constituents with a company like REI or North Face, which sell outdoor gear and equipment. But if you're not sure, what are some of the ways you can tell, what you have in common? You look at their advertisements, look at the in-store placement of their products. I consider the fact that in Sears, and granted, Sears is not quite as active here in Milwaukee as it used to be, but you think of Sears, you think of tools and appliances, but they're not at the front of the store. They're in the back. Women's clothing is going to be typically near the entrance. So what does that mean in terms of how their audience, how their constituents connect with your organization? Look into their website. Who else are they currently supporting? A lot of companies will actually conduct their own research into different areas and post it to their website. So these are just kind of different tools. If it's not obvious, you got to do a little digging into kind of what their, who their target audience is. Would companies want to connect with your constituents? Are there specific constituent groups of yours with which a company would want to connect, right? So, for example, one of PBS's sponsors is Viking River Cruises, right? How many times have you watched PBS and then at the end of the show, there's a commercial for Viking River Cruises? That's because Viking River Cruises did a survey of their current customers and asked them a series of questions, one of them being, what TV shows do you watch? And the overwhelming response was Masterpiece Classic, Downton Abbey on PBS. So in order to target new customers, similar to their current customers, they began advertising on Masterpiece Classic. And you'll find examples like that as well, all over television, all over advertisements. Let's move on. Do we address issues of interest to a company? For example, a nonprofit working to promote recycling and environmental cleanup might be able to connect with a waste management company. Do you have common goals? Studies have shown that besides price and quality, buyers will choose a product from a company which is viewed as socially responsible. So connecting with a nonprofit for a good cause can help them get that point across. Remember, though, it's not just about the company's good name and reputation. It's about yours as well, yours as an organization. So before you seek corporate support, you need to give some thought to who you want to do business with. Some corporate partnerships may turn off more donors than they attract. If your organization does not have a gift acceptance policy, now is a good time to establish one before you seek corporate support. A gift acceptance policy is like a guide for a nonprofit. It lays down a framework for the types of gifts the organization will accept and educates the staff and board about critical issues triggered by certain gifts. I'm actually going to put in the chat some examples of gift acceptance policies. My computer is being a little funky here, but hold on one second. I'll get all of this together. Let's see. There are some samples there that are downloading in the chat of I think there's 3 or 4 different versions of gift acceptance policies. So, as an example of all of this, if you are, when you talk about that sort of conflict of interest, if your nonprofit's mission has to do with lung cancer, are you going to accept a gift, no matter how big, from William Morris? You know, you can find all kinds of examples of gift acceptance policies. Just Google it. But like I say, there's some samples for you there to outline, you know, what is acceptable. Not just in this case, but in all cases, you know, real estate, all of that kind of thing. You may not want to take in gifts, and that way, if you have it established, you have something to fall back on should things get a little touchy in the conversations with a donor. So that's one resource for you. Supporting nonprofit causes is one way to draw positive attention to a company, right? Companies are looking for nonprofits that can raise their visibility by reaching a large audience. So in turn, companies will often perceive that associating their corporate name and brand with a nonprofit's good works, and in turn, your reputation, is an effective way to attract potential customers. This is, sometimes we refer to this as reflected glory. You know, your reputation and visibility are reflected onto that company, that corporate partner. But you can ask, you may be able to help a company raise its public profile, but here are some questions to ask yourself about that. How visible are you in the community? Are you well known? What is your reputation as an organization? How big of an audience do you have? Do you serve a general population or a specific population? And if so, how many? How broad is that audience? And how would you get their name in front of the public? How do we get our name in front of the public? Through a website, media coverage, publications, community events, all kinds of advertising. What tools would be available to you to help this organization increase their corporate visibility? You might also want to look for companies that are in need of, say, an image boost or a facelift, you know, to help them do damage control. A great example is British Petroleum, BP. It's now been, well, it's been 10 years since the big BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. But to this day, you'll still see commercials on TV about how that company is giving back to the environment. They have a whole page on their website called Gulf Commitment about how they're helping regional and national tourism campaigns, supporting long-term research, and so on. So if you're an environmental organization working in the Gulf, you can help BP improve their public image and then in turn further your mission. So to be a good corporate citizen. So what do we mean by that? A good corporate citizen. Effectively, we're talking about corporations. It's not just about the profits, right? There's a term that we use called CSR, corporate social responsibility. Companies want to be seen as socially responsible, and that means contributing to economic development while improving the quality of life for their employees and the community where their customers live and work, right? So often, corporate leaders are motivated by their desire to give back to the community where they do business. In addition, companies reach out to nonprofits as part of their government and community relations work, you know, developing relationships with community leaders and taking the lead on important civic issues. If you want to appeal to companies based on their corporate citizenship interests, starting with local companies that can see the good work you're doing is usually the most effective strategy. So some questions you can ask yourself are, what companies are in your own backyard? And how, who's there? Who is most local and going to be likely most understanding of your mission and the community you serve? how do you as an organization strive to enhance the local community? Making it a more attractive place for people to live and work, for the employees of this particular organization to live and work. And finally, how deep is your network of community leaders? This is your human capital. Think of your donors, your board members, volunteers, anyone associated with your nonprofit in some way. Those with whom corporate executives would want to associate. What do you have in terms of that human capital? So we're going to talk a little bit about how to find corporate partners. When we think about research and searching for corporate partners, we want to look for them based on what you do, what they do, and where they're located. We have time here, so that's great. I'm going to we're going to move into the foundation directory online, which is provided by Candid. We'll talk a little bit more. We do have specific classes focusing on this, but I want to show you how to use the foundation directory online as a tool to help you find these corporate partners. If you look, we'll do that in just a moment here, but if you look at these 3 questions, when it comes to the approach of a corporation, it helps if you can have someone open the door for you and make the connection. Is it an employee at the community, at the company, someone on your board, a spouse of one of your donors? It's good to have corporate representation on your board because they can bring in a whole network of contacts. As I mentioned way at the beginning, we talk more about approaching corporations and developing relationships with companies in a class that we're going to be offering this fall. It's a full day-long class talking about securing corporate partnerships. Look for that. It's not going to be till after summer. But I'm just trying to think another way to stay updated on what's going on and who are the movers and shakers in our corporate community. The Milwaukee Business Journal is a great resource. They will talk about who's coming into town, who's leaving, who's been promoted. And they also every year push out a book of lists, which is literally a list of the top companies in their specific fields by ranking. And that can help you really identify who your potential corporate partners might be. So those are kind of the resources I have. So let's move on to, oh, there's good 360 there. Hang on, I'm gonna switch screens here. Good 360. If you haven't, that's the website I was talking about before. Let's move on to FDO. If you do not already, I would encourage you, I'll stick a link in the chat when we're done here, to apply for access to the foundation directory online. Normally, you would access this in person at, in this case, UWM's library. There are 8 other, aside from HBI and UWM, there are 7 other locations around the state. There are over 400 locations nationally. But since we're all working from home, Candid has come up with a way to provide access to this database of funders. And you'll need to register for that with a link, like I said, I'll provide in a moment. But first, let's talk about this. I know some of you have been through that class. I recognize some names already, but I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of how this all applies specifically to corporate giving. One of the most important things you're going to find here up at the top is find funding. This is just going to take you to that same little box that we see here in the blue. Um, and you can simply type in, what you're looking for, and it'll give you all kinds of resources. What I'm going to do here is actually break it up a little bit. We're going to open up all the filters to show you all the different ways that you can search the directory. But as we're looking at for grant makers in the corporate world, there are a couple specific ways that we want to approach this. One of the most useful is going to be transaction type. If you just click in that box, you'll see all these different types of gifts that are available out there, everywhere from matching gifts, volunteer services, all of this in kind. It even breaks it down to help find different types of gifts, matching grants, plenty of ways, pro bono services, right? I mentioned at the beginning of the class that the Foundation Directory Online pulls from over 165,000 funders nationwide and 16 million grants. And that number actually goes up every week by thousands. So they're pulling from a lot of the most recent information. Let's do this. We're just going to look at pro bono services. Grant maker types. Let's look at a company sponsored foundation. And we'll just leave it there. Actually, I'm going to cut this back. No, we'll leave it full and search and see what comes up. We came up with a total of 6 grant makers. We did not look at location. This is just going to be nationwide. That list pro bono services. These are foundations, mind you, those corporate foundations that list pro bono services that are available. I'm actually going to look up, let's just look up Wisconsin. You can see here that it will pull down all kinds of aspects, even of location, including congressional districts, but let's look statewide. For those of you that haven't been in the FDO course, I want to clarify, geographic focus is where the work happens, the nonprofit work happens. Location is where the funder, the grant maker, or the recipient organization is located. This is where the office is. Location, geographic focus is where the work happens. So, actually, let's do that differently. Let's look up company-sponsored foundations in Wisconsin and just see what we come up with. 128, that's quite a few. Now, just looking at our results, there's a grant count. This is all sorted by the number of grants that this information is being pulled from. In this case, US Bank wins a pretty significant lead with over 27,000 grants over the last 18 years, mind you. Look, we can sort this. I normally recommend only pulling from the last 5 years because that's going to be the most pertinent information. And in that case, you can see that the Baird Foundation has jumped up quite a bit. So, so you can see by just updating and looking at the more current information, current giving trends, that list changed pretty significantly. So, these are corporate foundations in the state. You can then also, well, just click on the Baird Foundation to look at their list of, find out what type of work they're funding. Obviously, most of it based on the shading here is in Wisconsin, although they do give money nationwide. And these are the average sizes of the grants over the past 5 years. So we're talking more or less under 5,000. Interesting to note that the most common grant amount is only $50. My hunch is that this is their matching program. This is related to their employee matching program. But by looking at this, we can also find out whether or not you have perhaps one of their board people who attended your most recent fundraiser. Um, you can find out a number of bits of information by looking at their overall organizational profile. I want to go back to find funding. We're going to break this apart here a little bit. This is also important support strategy. This is the kind of gift, or the purpose of the gift. Capacity building are some examples, general support, outreach, program support. There's where to go. General support would be general operating support. So which organizations will fund that? These are important things to consider when you're looking for specific funders, regardless whether it's corporate or private foundations. One thing that I'm not real happy about here with FDO, they used to actually provide a feature where you could search companies, specific companies. They seem to have dropped that out in this new update. And so now when we look at organization type, you'll see we list businesses here, but they're only recipients. We're talking B Corp, social enterprises, etc. We can't actually look up businesses as grant makers in the same way that I wish we could. But I would encourage you to kind of poke around that. Community foundations, wait, where's the one? Nope, they've pulled them all out there for some reason. So hopefully that'll come back. But this is it's a useful tool in helping to find some of those more corporate focused entities that are out there. Any questions at this point? And feel free to unmute yourself. We're a fairly small group. I think we can manage that. So with this in mind, I'm going to actually switch back to our presentation and talk about some key takeaways. Before I do that, I'm going to stick a couple other documents in the chat. There is a handout here that kind of covers some of the most important topics in today's presentation, as well as a worksheet that will help you walk through some of the questions we've talked about in trying to identify corporate funders. Some of the key takeaways of the things that we talked about are that corporate philanthropy is motivated by company interests, first and foremost. We like to think that they're just open heart, open, caring, giving entities, but the simple fact is, and we can't deny that, is that they are going to be looking after their own primary interests. And it's important that you look at these organizations at your organization from that company's point of view. When they look at you as a nonprofit and the kind of work you do and the communities you engage with, your size and scope, your organizational representation, take a very clear and honest look at your own organization to see what that corporate funder might see in order to understand how best to approach them. And keep in mind that, as we talked about we talked about private foundations really only having, like I said, one mechanism to support. For-profit businesses have a number of different ways through a foundation, corporate giving programs, in-kind donations, and so on. So normally, if we were face-to-face, we would take some time and go through that worksheet together to just kind of talk through some of those questions. I'm not going to do that today. I think virtual is not really the best format for doing that together. But I would encourage you to look at the handout that I put in the chat in order to better understand kind of and work through some of the things we've talked about here today. Just to kind of throw out what's next in the pipeline. There is, as I said, check out Candid Learning, formerly GrantSpace. You can look for HBI's Nonprofit Skills Academy, which offers this and a number of other courses. We do have some more in the pipeline, as I've kind of alluded to, which some will be coming out in the next couple of months. Some might not be ready until next fall. The next course like this that we are offering is we've offered before, and I have to say, I think it's, of all of the courses that I've offered through Candid, Introduction to Fundraising Planning, I think is one of my favorite. I think it's one of the most comprehensive and useful, but we will be offering that again on May 5th. And we also have self-paced courses. One right now, we do have a couple more that will be coming out hopefully in about a month. Financial management tools for times of uncertainty. We'll walk you through various templates and tools for a nonprofit leader to use to look at crisis budgeting. This past year has certainly proven the need for a strong understanding of how to manage your budget in times of uncertainty when you're not quite sure where the money's going to come from, and how you can plan appropriately. So that is a self-paced course that you register for. You're given about a month to go through it on your own, with the ability to reach out and ask questions as well. So with all of that in mind, are there any questions about all of the stuff we've covered in the last hour? There's been a lot, I know. Feel free to unmute or throw it in the chat. We can all just kind of have a conversation. If you do not have questions, there is my contact information. Definitely reach out to me one-on-one. I'm more than happy to talk through some of this stuff, either via email, or we can set up a phone call or a one-on-one Zoom. I have no problem with that. So definitely feel free. Don't hesitate at all. Feel free to stick around. We can talk, we can chat, but otherwise, that's all I've got for you. So I would encourage you to check it all out on your own. As I said, you'll be getting a video, you'll be getting the PowerPoint presentation and the handouts and a survey in a follow-up email, hopefully by later today, if I just can manage that. So otherwise, look for it tomorrow. With that, have a great afternoon.